birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Welcome to Cineversary, a podcast that celebrates a milestone anniversary of a masterful work of cinema. Every month we extend happy birthday wishes to a different film currently observing a joyous jubilee. That's anything from a 20th all the way up to a 100th anniversary. This is your devoted host, Eric Martin, creator of the Cineverse blog and moderator of the weekly Cineverse film discussion group. And if you've just found our show, jump on in, the water's warm. If you're a regular listener, we are of course grateful to have you back. Romantic dramas and rom-coms alike have often followed a predictable template and cliched boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back format that typically involves a meet-cute, sensual lovemaking scene or two, silly scenarios, rising and falling melodramatic action, and bucketfuls of heart-plucking soppiness along the journey. But a fresh outing in this subgenre that hit 30 years ago bucked these trends and, lacking a traditional plot, braved forward mostly on the merits of its transcendent dialogue and the undeniable chemistry of its leads. That film was Before Sunrise, directed by Richard Linklater, co-written by Linklater and Kim Krizan, and starring Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy. Originally released on January 19, 1995 at the Sundance Film Festival, before a wide release a week later. Accompanying me on this month's Cineversary, none other than co-screenwriter Kim Krizan herself, who shares fascinating details about how the script was written. I'll also be joined by documentary filmmaker Rob Stone, who's a professor of film and television studies at the University of Birmingham in the UK. Together, we'll examine why Before Sunrise still matters, the many films it has influenced, its major themes, and much, much more. But just ahead of my discussions with Kim and Rob, it's my duty to catch you up first on when, why, and how this picture was made. So here's the lowdown. Before Sunrise marks the first installment in Richard Linklater's Before trilogy. Filmed on location in Vienna, the movie is known for its minimalist plot, centering on extended conversations and monologues that delve into themes like love, time, mortality, self-discovery, and postmodern romance. The simple story follows Jesse, played by Ethan Hawke, and Celine, portrayed by Julie Delpy, who meet on a Eurail train and decide to spend a night together exploring Vienna. The inspiration for the film came from Linklater's encounter with a woman named Amy Lerhaupt in 1989. The two spent an evening walking and talking in Philadelphia, a memory that heavily influenced the movie. Initially, the screenplay was intentionally vague about the characters' identities and the city they explored. Recognizing the importance of a strong female perspective in the dialogue, Linklater enlisted Kim Krizan as a co-writer who had appeared in his earlier films Slacker and Dazed and Confused. Before Sunrise's casting process was meticulous, taking 9 months to finalize Hawke and Delpy as leads. While Linklater initially thought Hawke was too young for the role, a conversation after seeing him perform in a New York play changed his mind. Julie Delpy was cast as Celine after impressing Linklater thanks to her personality and chemistry with Hawke during a final reading, which solidified the duo as the perfect leading actors. Before Sunrise earned $22.5 million at the box office against a $2.5 million budget and garnered widespread acclaim for its screenplay, its direction, and its performances. Today, the movie boasts a perfect 100% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes, where its average critical score is 8.8 out of 10 versus a popcorn meter audience score of 93%. In 2010, the British newspaper The Guardian ranked Before Sunrise and its sequel Before Sunset number 3 on its critics' list of the 25 best romantic films of all time, and number 2 in an online readers' poll. Entertainment Weekly, meanwhile, placed the film at number 25 on its list of the top 25 modern romances. In a 2008 poll conducted by Empire, Before Sunrise was ranked as the 200th greatest movie ever. Online film critic James Berardinelli described Before Sunrise as the best romance of all time. All right, let's climb aboard the Before Sunrise trailer train before it leaves the station.
All right, I have an admittedly insane idea, but if I don't ask you this, it's just gonna haunt me the rest of my life. I have no idea what your situation is, but I feel like we have some kind of connection, right?
Yeah, me too.
Great. So listen, here's the deal. This is what we should do. You should get off the train with me here in Vienna and come check out the town. We just got into Vienna today, and we're looking for something fun to do. Sprechen Sie English?
Yeah, of course, yeah. Do you speak German for a change?
Now I'm gonna call my best friend in Paris, who I'm supposed to have lunch with in 8 hours. Okay?
Okay.
Ring, ring. Pick up the phone.
Hello?
I don't think I'm gonna be able to make it for lunch today, I'm sorry. I met a guy on the train and I got off with him in Vienna. I was still there.
Are you crazy?
Probably. He has beautiful blue eyes, nice pink lips, frizzy hair. I love it. I like to feel his eyes on me when I look away. You couldn't possibly know why a night like this is so important to my life right now. But it is. Since we're never gonna see each other again, I don't think we should sleep together.
Let's see each other again.
I don't want you to break our vow, just so you can get laid. Men are lucky we don't bite off their head after mating. Certain insects do that, you know, like spiders and stuff. Mm-hmm. We at least let you live.
Quick heads up that my conversations with Kim and Rob to follow, they're going to contain spoilers, so if this film remains an unwatched oversight, it's time to catch up to what all the fuss is about and screen Before Sunrise before going any further. Okie dokie, on with the show. Let's give it up now for Rob Stone, a professor of film and television studies at the University of Birmingham in the UK. He's a filmmaker and author whose works include the documentary Some Stories and the book The Cinema of Richard Linklater, Walk, Don't Run. He also appears on the Criterion Collection edition of Before Sunrise in one of its many bonus features. Hey, Rob, it's wonderful to have you here. Welcome to Cineversary.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Right back at you. So, it is Before Sunrise's 30th birthday. Hard to believe. Time goes by quickly.
That's so crazy. Yeah.
So when did you first discover this film, Rob, and what were your initial reactions to it? And for that matter, have those opinions changed or evolved since that time?
Right. Oh, we go back a long way. We go back to the moment it came out. I saw it when it first came out. I was living in Madrid at the time.
Wow.
And I went to one of the little art house cinemas in the center of the city. I wasn't really sure what to expect, but I'd go along and see whatever was happening during the day. And I was just enchanted, enraptured. You know, I'd done a lot of traveling around Europe by train. I'd met my own soulmate in Madrid and I decided to stay there. I'd been in Madrid for about 5 years. It was a really great time for me. And watching this film, it just hit me on so many levels. I was absolutely fascinated by the dynamic between Jesse and Celine. You know, the fundamental question, is it easier to identify with a romantic who pretends to be a cynic like Jesse, or is it easier to identify with a cynic who pretends to be a romantic like Celine?
Potato, potato, tomato, tomato.
Absolutely, yeah. I came out of the cinema raving about it. I remember at the time I was writing film reviews for an English language newspaper in Spain. And I wrote one on Before Sunrise saying that if it had been made in the 1940s with, say, James Stewart and Ingrid Bergman, it would now be as well loved as Casablanca. I wasn't that far wrong. I mean, years later, I became an academic, became the professor of film studies. I was working on Spanish, Basque, and Cuban cinema. And then I moved into working on American independent cinema. And that gave me the opportunity to write on Before Sunrise and on Linklater.
Fantastic.
You know, so it's been 30 years of this film and its sequels. And I married my Spanish soulmate, so we've been together 30 years too. You know, we grew up and we grew old with the Before trilogy.
Wow, it almost sounds like you and your wife are a bit of a Jesse-Celine kind of pairing in a way that you met overseas, of course.
Yeah.
You know, you had some train travels involved, it sounds like. So, yeah, it sounds like you're a kindred spirit to the characters in the film as well as maybe the filmmaker himself.
I think there's something of that, yeah, definitely. I'm more of the romantic, she's more of the cynic, but we kind of, we meet in the middle.
Yeah, usually if you're too similar, maybe things don't work out. If you're a little bit different, or as they say, opposites attract, so I can relate between my wife and I.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you were a fan instantly of the film. It's not like it had to grow over time in your estimation.
No.
You were aboard right from the beginning.
Absolutely. Right from the very first moment it started, I was lost to it.
Yeah, so I have to ask, I assume you've seen all three Before films, correct?
Yes.
And so where does this rank? Is this your favorite, or do you rank them all kind of equally?
I think they're kind of inseparable. Asking me to separate them is just impossible now because the saga is so,
Yeah.
it's so wrapped up in itself, and each film informs the other.
Right.
But I have to admit that Before Sunrise is very special to me. I watched it again last night, and I was expecting to be nostalgic about it, but nothing of the kind. I was right there with them again. I love Before Sunset too. That's such a perfect film. And Before Midnight, I think, is challenging, but that grows richer every time I watch it.
Sure. Wow. Well, that's a very honest assessment. If you ask me, I mean, I came especially late to this party, Rob,
Okay.
because my first watch was only about 10 years ago, and this was for my film discussion group called Cineverse.
Right.
We're kind of like a book club. We meet every week, and we talk about a different movie, and we discuss it for up to 90 minutes. Yeah, so 10 years ago, I first catch this movie, and I'm like, wow, where have I been? you know. Anyway, I just remember being wowed by how refreshingly different this movie was, especially
Yeah.
for a romance picture, if you call it that.
Hmm.
A few years later, I did pick up the Criterion Collection box set of all three Before films. And I think that provides irrefutable proof that, yeah, this is one of the great trilogies of all time. I mean, every film in the triptych is equally excellent,
Yes.
although I'm still most partial to this film.
Me too.
I tend to favor the first in a series usually. I don't know. There's something magical right out of the gate where usually the filmmakers get it right the first time, and it's usually difficult for a sequel to live up to that. But I have to say, all three Before films uniformly excellent.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's no dip at all in quality. They're actually quite different, but they sustain the saga, they sustain the same themes, they sustain the emotions in an extraordinary manner. Yeah, I totally agree with you.
Absolutely. So let's go a little deeper here. What makes Before Sunrise such a fantastic and unique picture, and for that matter, deserving of a 30th anniversary celebration?
Yeah, I'm still trying to get over the fact that it's 30 years. That's
Yeah,
great.
I know. Yeah, if we measure our life in movie years,
Oh, wow.
yeah, as time can fleet by pretty quickly, and this is proof of that. So yeah, let's put our finger on it. What makes it so special?
Well, I think you've just put your finger on it. I think that's the main theme of the film. It's the fleeting moments and what we make of them. The film itself, Before Sunrise. It's a very intimate film, but it's also very universal.
Hmm.
It's rooted in a very specific place. It's rooted in Vienna, but it's totally untethered in terms of time. And I think it deals in our understandings of time,
Yes.
in our understandings of death too, and also in our understandings of love. It's a very funny film, but it's also achingly sad. It's perfectly performed, I think, and it feels like virtual reality. I said I watched it again last night. It was like putting on a headset and going back to Vienna in 1995, just to hang out again with these two smart, gorgeous, maddening people and share their experiences of Vienna and each other.
We're going to have fun talking about themes of the film, so we will certainly circle back and discuss the temporal nature of their conversations and what
Right.
Linkletter and company are doing here with time, because that's, I think, at the heart of understanding and appreciating Before Sunrise.
Yes, it is.
In answer to this question, what makes it so unique, so special, deserving of kudos? It's an easy movie to root for and embrace, and to me, in large part because it's such an underdog success story. I mean, Before Sunrise, it's a low-budget, under-the-radar indie that at the time nobody really saw coming, but it's gathered such momentum, right, Rob? I mean, over the past 3 decades, it's gathered this momentum as a terrific word-of-mouth favorite
Yes.
among so many film fans. Yes, it proved to be a success based on surprisingly good box office returns relative to its, I looked it up, $2.5 million budget, as well as positive critical reception early on. And that's still true, by the way, as evidenced by, if you go to Rotten Tomatoes, it's still there, 100% Rotten Tomatoes score.
Good.
But more importantly, to me, the movie has come to represent a kind of a dark horse cinematic triumph that demonstrates that despite limited resources, despite lesser names at the time, because again, who was Richard Linkletter? He wasn't really on a lot of people's maps. And for that matter, Ethan Hawke, Julie Delpy, not big names. And despite little ballyhoo out of the gate, the power of quality over quantity, of craft over crass commercialism in a subgenre, the romance film,
Yeah.
brimming with mass-marketed mediocrity. I think that's at the heart of understanding why I especially appreciate this movie. It is a dark horse kind of underdog, a come-from-behind success story to me that, again, I didn't see it in 1985. But I remember a little bit of the marketing of this movie and just over the years how the word of mouth grew is what I'm getting at. It's definitely a word of mouth movie that gets shared by people.
Yes.
And that's wonderful to hear. I mean, a lot of people will say, "Oh, I love Titanic. Isn't it romantic?" Yep, everybody in the world saw Titanic. Not a lot of people saw Before Sunrise, but those that did, chances are they were recommended. They were referred to the picture by somebody. That's my hunch.
I totally agree. And of course, added to that, it's been kept alive by its two sequels. So it can be endlessly revisited. You know, the saga grows. I teach it every year to my students, and some have seen it before. Many of them discover it for the first time, and it becomes a favorite film of many. It can be binge watched, it can be, or the trilogy can be watched in reverse order. It keeps gaining in meaning in different levels. You know, as I said, we expect it to become more nostalgic. Distance should make us sadder, more melancholic, but it can also make us, I think, more glad that we experienced it. And you're right as well, it's a unique and massively influential experiment. It seems improvised, but of course it's based on a very tight script and intense rehearsal, which is essential for low-budget filmmaking.
Right.
It's a 90-minute walk and talk, which can seem aimless. It can also make you cringe. It's a very innocent film on one level, bursting with ideas, but it's also a film that I think kind of feels very old, as if it's burdened by experience and it's trying to make sense of things.
Right.
I always subscribe one of the great film writers is Robin Wood, and he was one of the first proper academic writers to approach Before Sunrise, and he wrote on it. And as he's writing, he explains, he exclaims. Actually, he throws up his hands when he's writing. He surrenders his objectivity, his critical distance, and he admits in this chapter he wrote for a book of his that he was a film that he didn't just admire, but for which he felt love. I kind of get that too. It's a film that, you know, transcends the experience of watching the film. I'm watching it again last night. I don't know how many times I've seen it, but just finding myself caught up in it again. It's a profoundly philosophical film.
Yes.
It's one that creates a dialogue with other films, not just its own sequels. It creates a dialogue between American and European cinema, between classic and modern cinema, between the romantic comedy musical and the really low-budget indie. It's all of those things. So it operates on all those levels. And each time I watch it, I'm struck by how it exists at the junction between so many things, which enables us to read the film as kind of metaphorical as well as metaphysical, you know?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
No, that's very well summarized and articulated. Absolutely share every sentiment you just did. But I think the formula for brilliance of this film is three primary ingredients. Spot on casting,
Yeah.
outstanding performances, and most importantly, exceptional dialogue, because very little in the form of plot or action happens, right? We need to believe in the discourse. We need to find it credible. So the writing requires a balanced approach. And if you dig a little deeper, if you talk to somebody like Kim Krizan, you realize that it wasn't just written by Richard Linklater. It's shared scripting here between a man and a woman. And hence, he enlisted the aid of a female screenwriter who also appears in a separate interview on this podcast, folks, by the way, so listen to the whole show. She especially helped with Celine's lines, because written entirely by a man, this film may not have resonated as strongly or plausibly.
Right.
But being so reliant on its two main characters to captivate us, Rob, the key to this picture succeeding for me was, again, to have this stellar script in hand. Mission accomplished there. And then everyone else just get out of the way so that these two gifted actors can do the heavy lifting, which is exactly what happens. So here I'm going to quote, this is film reviewer James Berardinelli, who said, "For this film to work, Hawke and Delpy have a threefold task: embrace their characters, attract each other, and connect with the audience. The rapport between Jesse and Celine is so lacking in artifice that at times the viewer feels like a voyeur. We are privy to everything, including the sort of unimportant dialogue that most films shy away from." I think what also elevates this film to the upper echelon, Rob, is how it's unpredictable in ways large and small. And now an example of the former is how at the finale, of course, we are left to guess if they will ever meet again.
Yeah.
An instance of the latter, and maybe a smaller way, is how, despite an early scene where Celine and Jesse are invited by, if you recall, the two Viennese thespians to later attend their play, they never do.
They never do, no.
So this superbly written and acted film has the luxury of completely discarding that earlier play invite setup, which many viewers, including myself on first watch, may have expected to have a later payoff. That speaks to me of, wow, you are really surprising your audience.
Yeah.
Anything else stand out to you in terms of what makes this movie great?
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's the script, it's the dialogue, it's the casting. It's also, for me, it's one of the great films about place, though. If you've ever been to Vienna, and I went to Vienna in 2013 when my book on Linklater came out, and we spent a couple of days moving around the city finding all the places where it had been filmed. and just finding the locations and finding it as if it was preserved. You know, you become almost like a character in the film itself.
Wow.
And I think it is one of those great films that can communicate a sense of place. As much as the emphasis is on Jesse and Celine, Vienna is the third character in that film.
Absolutely, yes. It's a great point. I have to ask, just a trivial note, when you visited Vienna, back in 2013, are there actual travel guides who will help you recreate the places shot in the film? I'm curious if it has attained that level of status in Vienna.
Oh yes, there are. And they have regular screenings of the film. And when you go around and find some of the original locations, like Cafe Spurl, where they have the pretend phone call, or the record store where they listen to the song, there are little things which are being kept from the film. You know, if you go into the record store, for example, then you have the copy of the record that they play, "Come Here" by Kath Crew,
Fun.
which is framed on the wall.
Yeah.
And the owners will happily let you take a photograph with it.
That's great. But are there actual guides who you have to pay and they will take you from place to place to place? I'm just curious if a cottage industry has sprung up in Vienna.
Oh, there are. Yeah, no, there definitely are. And if you go online, you can find people who they act as guides and they'll take you around. But that's not the point of sort of recreating the film. When my wife and I went there in 2013, it was with the idea of just us two getting lost and wandering Vienna and finding the places where it had been filmed. So actually trying to find those locations was the closest that I think anybody can actually get to being in Before Sunrise itself, you know?
There you go. It's more fun to kind of seek them out on your own, I would expect, right?
Exactly. It's more fun to seek them out.
Plus you save a few bucks.
Well, that's true.
You don't need that as the only reason to visit Vienna. What a beautiful city that is. But again, it is an interesting phenomenon, I'm sure, that has taken place over probably the last 30 years. I've never been, so it's a bucket list location. I'd love to go.
Well, it's a great way to find out about how the film was made. You know, it's like retrofitting your analysis. I mean, I love and enjoy The Sleight of Hand by Linklater of creating this coherent trajectory around Vienna. As I said, we found the locations of the films. I've done it for Before Sunset. I've done it for Before Midnight too. So we went in 2013. It was Bloomsday, June the 16th. Had to be, of course, because that's when Before Sunrise is set.
That's right.
And we spent the most wonderful day roaming the city and finding Cafe Spurl, Klein's Cafe, the fairground, the trams, the record shop. And the most amazing thing is that there's no logic at all to their appearance in the film. So as you're watching the film now, you're catching them out. They switch riverbanks without crossing it. Suddenly they're outside the city at the cemetery. They go in one church and they're filmed sitting inside another one. They go the wrong way entirely on the tram, but when they get off it, they're back where they got on. They turn a corner, they're suddenly miles away.
Well, what you're describing, of course, is the magic of the movies.
I was just to say.
It doesn't make a lot of sense in the real world. Like, again, if you retrace the steps where they shot, sometimes you could be disappointed or for that matter, flabbergasted, as you just described.
But it's also, as you say, it just makes everything more magical. There's very little logic to the route. Just makes the film even more metaphysical until they come crashing back to reality at the end. And I think it takes true artistry to discover, construct, and sustain that sense of a city the way that Linklater does in Before Sunrise.
Well, what you've just described to me proves all the more why I'm so happy I chose you as my main guest on this episode, because you've lived it. You've recreated it, if you will, the film, and you're so passionate about it, you and your wife apparently, that you would go back and you would kind of, as I said, retrace the steps. So that's passion, sir. Kudos to you. Not everybody would do that, but what has helped this movie stand the test of time, especially as a romance and relationship film? Pulling off a winning romantic drama, Rob, it's no layup. Many viewers who frequent this aisle have expectations for Harlequin novel-esque wooing, for torrid sex scenes, for stirringly soppy interplays between stock characters. And Before Sunrise is just such a revitalizing new entree on a mostly stale menu, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Granted, the plot, it's threadbare. Very little happens. But instead of turning to a proven yet overused formula, I think the filmmakers bank on two interesting personalities and well-written conversations. The emphasis is on then believable human interactions, right, over like a crunchy plot or storyline.
Yeah.
And I think this work isn't limited in its appeal to only Gen Xers, which is, of course, the demographic represented by Celine and Jesse. The issues and questions these young 20-somethings discuss they remain evergreen, right? They're relevant to adult couples of almost any age. Would you agree?
Yeah, I totally agree. Except for Before Midnight, because I mean, as I say, I've been teaching this for many years, and my students struggle with Before Midnight. You need to have been in a long-term relationship to understand the dynamic of that film.
Yeah.
So the innocence of Before Sunrise
Mm-hmm.
and the energy of Before Sunset, but the melancholy of Before Midnight, I think you need to be of a certain age to really kind of understand what that's about.
Sure. But again, in all fairness, we're talking about the first one only here.
Yeah,
It's definitely a movie about and perhaps for Gen Xers,
yeah,
at least the way it was marketed in its time and so forth. But I don't think that limits it. As I said, I think the questions raised, the issues discussed are timeless. And again,
yes,
they can relate to any couple of virtually any age group. I don't think Linklater and company are aiming for melodramatic emotional manipulation, right? They're not trying to trick you with some heavy-handed twist at the end.
hmm
There's no sex scene. We're not even sure if they consummated the relationship. I know it's discussed later in the prequels,
that's right.
but it is quite astounding when you consider that almost all movies of this stripe, Rob, they eventually include a bedding down sequence and some degree of nakedness.
hmm
Now, sadly, this film, if you look it up, it remains rated R, which
Really?
to me is a travesty. Even though there is no nudity, there's no violence,
Yeah.
there's only sparse profanity. That's just myopic and unfortunate to me because it limits Before Sunrise's appeal and exposure. And at the time, in its the original theatrical run, it limited it, at least in the States, where teenagers could have certainly enjoyed and learned from this picture, right? In 2025, this remains an excellent film for adolescents to watch, in my humble opinion, regardless of that restrictive rating. I'm curious what the rating system is in the UK, and is it still the equivalent of R over there?
No, here it's rated 15 in the UK.
Okay,
So it's, for late teenagers, it's perfect for them. There's no restrictions on it at all.
that's good.
I'm even surprised by the 15, to be honest, but I'm amazed by that it's an R in the States.
I don't think people really pay much attention to that once it's on home video and streaming and all of that. But it's unfortunate that, yeah, at least in its time, 1995, teenagers would have been prevented from seeing it.
That's amazing to me. I've always found it to be the most universal and innocent of films, so
Sure.
I don't know why the American rating system would have taken against it in that way.
So, other ways in terms of comparing, contrasting to other romance films, we talked about how Before Sunrise, it's set in this naturally picturesque, colorfully vibrant Vienna. But it doesn't go out of its way to romanticize that city or use it as a travelogue-like backdrop where the viewer expects the characters to fall in love because they're surrounded by this abundance of natural beauty and venerated culture. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
It's not necessarily a love letter to Vienna. It's admirable that the filmmakers don't try to exploit the fact that this is set in a foreign city and use its famous landmarks, its art, its architecture to what? To over-sentimentalize, to color its characters or situations.
Yeah.
Again, in retrospect, it's easy to say, oh, isn't it romantic? It's set in Vienna. And that's a positive thing. But I don't think that they're going for, like, let's say a lot of these romance films are set in Paris, where it's kind of like a picture postcard travelogue kind of thing for, oh, isn't it perfect? It's in Paris. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like when you watch Before Sunset, there's no shot of the Eiffel Tower.
Mm-hmm.
Vienna is a lived-in city in Before Sunrise. What makes the city great is the street life that they encounter.
Sure.
It's not about the museums, it's not about the architecture and the monuments, which are spectacular. It's just about the street life, and this is what Linklater experienced, and this is what he wanted to put on film. And I think it comes across wonderfully. It's this sense that truth is found in the interaction of people on the street,
Yes.
There's no kind of official sense. There's no overwhelming history that we all have to buy into, and it's there for the tourists. It's not. It's the reality. The truth is found at street level interaction.
So true.
It's interesting to try and fit a template of a genre over this film. For me, it's always felt like a musical, but without any singing or dancing. The numbers are the dialogues, and the dancing is the way that they move around the city. And this is why it has this wonderful feeling of this rapture of being caught up in the moment, as you see in so many great musicals.
Sure. It's so interesting that you call it a musical. I mean, the movie benefits from an eclectic score. If you
It
look
does,
closely, if maybe you identify some of the pieces, but I'm not that savvy, so I'm looking them up. And yeah, there's classical works here by Beethoven, by Vivaldi, by Strauss and Bach. And there's also contemporary rock and alternative music tracks used in the movie. There's even a little bit of yakety sax going on at the
There is.
carnival.
There is indeed. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so funny. But
Yes.
so it's, again, this eclectic mix, but you equate it to somewhat of a musical. That's very interesting.
Well, I think it's the structure, it's just the structure of the film. It's like they move around from number to number.
Yeah.
So, for example, the palm reader is a number, and then the poet on the canal, that's another number. And then the phone call in Cafe Spurl, that's another number. It feels to me very much like a song and dance film.
But also, in answer to this question about how it plays into this subgenre that we're talking about, the romantic drama, the romantic comedy, like other Linklater films, including Slacker, including Dazed and Confused, Before Sunset, Before Midnight, this narrative, of course, occurs over a single day. And what's the benefit? Well, it doesn't give us the benefit of a prologue or an epilogue or flashbacks, right? I mean, this scenario creates an emotional urgency and immediacy, and I think it fuels Jesse and Celine to make the most of their limited window of time.
Absolutely.
That's what I like about it. There is a constraint involved as far as a limited window. And we've seen that before in other romances, other pictures. But it works so wonderfully well here because you really know the stakes.
Absolutely, yeah. It's the emphasis on time is crucial. It's the concern for passing moments, and inevitably, it's the way that this comes up against mortality. So Celine is always talking about death,
Yes.
and the conversation turns so often to the presence in life of death. She says so often things like she's terrified of death 24 hours a day. The film seems to subscribe to a kind of a philosophy of time that refuses to accept time as linear, much like it refuses to accept the geography of Vienna as being in any way restrictive. And whereas we get these Western ideas of time, which see it as linear and finite, I think the film suggests that what we're doing is we're living in a single, ongoing, and incomplete moment. And it's something that comes through in other films by Linklater, such as Boyhood. I mean, time is not linear. This is Jesse's opening gambit on the train. It's to convince Celine that time is not linear and that time travel is possible. And of course, the trilogy turns this into a complete narrative loop because that's how the trilogy concludes at the end of Before Midnight too.
Yes, no, it's great how it's symmetrical in that way, and everything kind of wraps up in the way that you're describing this time travel experiment.
So this moment of their meeting in Vienna it contains the past and the future in its passing present. And really, the film is saying that's all we can ever know. The present continuous tense is where we live, and that can be either or both terrifying or limiting, and the film is asking us, how do we live in this eternal, ongoing, incomplete moment? Well, we need to accept it. We need to go with the flow. We need to make the most of the moments that come our way and the opportunities, like possibly meeting our soulmate. We have to live in what seem like passing moments, but are actually just this one single, ongoing, incomplete moment. And it connects us to all of these different ideas. Truth is tied up in the way that we present ourselves in these moments, how insecurity and hopefulness is always bubbling under our encounters with other people. I think all those ideas are present, and we have to recognize that in part, I think it's thanks to Linklater having studied French and Russian literature at university.
Oh, you could tell he did his brushing up. He is well versed in a lot of different philosophies.
Yes, that's
let
right.
alone classic literature. So yeah, you could tell. And deep thoughts, man. For if you just looked at the surface, if you judged a book by its cover and didn't watch Before Sunrise, you think, well, what can I expect from a movie like this? It looks like one of those meet cute romances or something.
Yeah.
And I guess in a way, it's fair to say there is a meet cute on the train. But what other romantic drama / comedy are you going to watch where they're talking about such deep philosophical issues? I defy you to name one.
Yeah. Although, of course, it's been such an influential film. It's created its own, lots of films have attempted to copy it in its wake.
Oh, yeah, that's a good segue because let's talk about that a bit. In ways the film might have been influential, perhaps inspiring subsequent movies or filmmakers that we can trace. So I've got a whole list here, but I'm going to let you go first. Does anything spring to mind that you say, wow, okay, that's definitely something that was inspired by Before Sunrise?
Oh, sure. I mean, the list grows longer all the time.
Sure.
It created a kind of a template for low-budget filmmaking, and it influenced a great many films and filmmakers. It was a big influence on mumblecore, of course, with films like Alex Holdridge's In Search of the Midnight Kiss,
Okay.
Aaron Katz's Quiet City, Barry Jenkins' film Medicine for Melancholy, which is wonderful. And they all wear the influence very proudly. The last Barry Jenkins film, Medicine for Melancholy, even has a fairground scene, which seems to be a direct acknowledgement of the influence of Before Sunrise. And the influence is sustained in many recent films. One of the most beautiful recent films I've seen is actually a British movie you may not have heard of called Rye Lane, directed by Raina Ann Miller.
Wow, no.
It's just wonderful. It's a truly modern, progressive, post-Brexit British film. It breaks away from all the social realism that we're accustomed to in terms of British cinema, and it explores this same kind of metaphysical escape in modern London. As a young man or woman, they meet and they stroll around the city getting to know each other. It's one of my favorite films of recent years. If you love Before Sunrise, I do recommend Rye Lane.
Fantastic. No, it hasn't been on my radar. I never heard of it, so I will have to catch up to it. So on my list, I mean, some of these are obvious, and I'm sure you've thought of them or have seen many of these, but I'll just go chronologically.
Sure.
You think of something like In the Mood for Love, 2000. Wong Kar-wai?
Yeah.
His exploration of unspoken love and fleeting moments, I think, draws from the well of Before Sunrise. Then you think of something like Lost in Translation, of course, from 2003. Yeah. Sofia Coppola's meditation on the longing and emotional connection between two characters in a foreign city. There's Once from 2007. This is an Irish musical romance that follows two strangers who form a deep connection over a short time before parting.
Wonderful film.
Of course, Julie Delpy's film that she directed, 2 Days in Paris from 2007, which explores relationship dynamics with humor and realism and influenced, of course, by her collaboration with Linklater. There is Certified Copy from 2010. This is a story of a man and woman wandering a European town that captures the raw intimacy, perhaps, of Before Sunrise.
Yes.
A film called Weekend from 2011. This is Andrew Haig's British indie, that explores fleeting intimacy and meaningful conversations between two men in this context over a weekend.
Yeah.
Blue Jay, 2016. It's a black and white picture. I've not seen this one, but it's about former lovers who reconnect. And I forgot about this one, but we watched it in our Cineverse film discussion group a few years back. Columbus from 2017 by the filmmaker Kogonada.
Kogonada, yes.
This is an introspective film about two people bonding over architecture, which kind of mirrors the quiet conversations and emotional depth of Before Sunrise. So, yeah, between the two of us, we came up with quite a few examples of how pervasive the reach and influence of Before Sunrise is and was.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great template. And it's cheap. You have two actors, you have real locations, single camera setups, direct sound, and it's intense when done well, as all the films you've mentioned and the ones I did do it too. Actors love it, of course.
Sure.
There's a risk of theatricality, but it avoids this by this fluid use of locations as well. I mean, this is what I say, the locations often become the third character. There's Vienna in Before Sunrise, London in Rye Lane, San Francisco in Medicine for Melancholy. Pick a city and let's see where the template ends up.
How about Madrid? What's the great romantic drama or comedy set in Madrid?
Oh, there's a lot. I mean, there's several films by Pedro Almodóvar, but the film that is actually most similar is probably never heard of it, but it's a low-budget film called Stockholm, which is based almost entirely on the template of Before Sunrise.
Wow.
A young man meets a young woman at a party. They spend the night walking and talking around Madrid. It's a wonderful film with a very, very twisted end and a very dark ending, so be warned. It's not the ending like Before Sunrise. It goes somewhere very strange and dark.
Okay.
But still, it's very clearly based on Before Sunrise.
Yeah, but just incredible to trace this trajectory. Like, again, there's a lot of legs there. Quite a strong body of evidence that Linklater has really created something with a lot of momentum. So we traced movies in its wake. How about movies before that might have influenced Linklater himself, or Kim Krizan for that matter, predecessors that may have inspired the filmmakers here? Anything come to mind before Sunrise?
Before Sunrise, yeah. We turned the telescope around. I mean, one of the films to most influence it was a 1945 film called The Clock.
Oh, yeah.
Which was starring Judy Garland and Robert Walker, and it was directed by Vincente Minnelli.
Yeah, it's a romance about a single-day love story in New York, in
That's
fact.
the one.
So you got that real-time structure and exploration of brief, intense relationships, certainly.
Exactly. And of course, it's Judy Garland, but it's not a musical, but it feels like one because it has the same kind of structure going on. But if we want to look for the real influence, I think we have to look to the French cinema of the 1960s, the French New Wave, the films of Erich Rohmer, of course, The Aviator's Wife, which is referenced in Before Sunset, The Green Ray, which is referenced in Before Midnight, and many others. And Rohmer made very sensitive, intimate films based on characters trying to work out their place in the world and being distracted by love, their responsibilities, and other people. And his films, like Before Sunrise, they often seem on the surface, maybe they're featherweight, but they invariably touch on and illustrate grand philosophies. And other films of the French New Wave are present as well, especially the series of films that Francois Truffaut made, chronicling the life of Antoine Donnel,
Yep.
which began with The 400 Blows in 1959 and it continued through the years with Antoine and Colette,
Hmm.
Stolen Kisses, Bed and Board, and finally Love on the Run, which was 20 years later in 1979.
Right. There you go. If you're looking for a template or a filmmaker to take a nod from, there you go, right there.
Yeah, I mean, I've met and interviewed Linklater twice, for the two editions of the book, and his passion for the French New Wave and his love of those films really shines through.
You could tell.
Yeah, and he does kind of throw his hands up and admit, that's the masterclass. That's what we all aspire to.
No question. Wow. So you named some really good ones there. A few ones to add to the list. Of course, you think of Brief Encounter from 1945, this classic tale of a fleeting love affair
Beautiful.
that shares themes of, brief connections, bittersweet romance. You did mention The Clock. That's the same year. There's Letter from an Unknown Woman. This is Max O'Foole's exploration of fleeting love,
Of course.
the emotional weight of brief connections, the passage of time. The Third Man. Now, it is certainly not a romance, but the atmospheric depiction of post-war Vienna is prevalent in that noir. You've got the famous Ferris wheel scene in that movie, which is the same Ferris wheel used in Before Sunrise. That may have inspired Linklater's choice of a similarly evocative European setting.
Yeah.
There is An Affair to Remember from 1957. It's often brought up by a lot of purists and fans of classic cinema as one of those great romance movies, but it has themes of romantic ideals and a promise to reunite that echoes Before Sunrise's open-ended conclusion of trust and love. You think of perhaps Woody Allen, some early Woody Allens like Annie Hall from 1977 or Manhattan, where you've got the blend of humor, depth, and reflective storytelling, the focus on intellectual dialogue, the use of cityscapes as a romantic backdrop. Perhaps you think of My Dinner with Andre from 1981, because that's a dialogue-driven narrative.
That's right.
It centers on a philosophical conversation. Maybe it helped shape Before Sunrise's emphasis on character-driven exchanges, too.
Mm-hmm.
And then Chungking Express springs to mind from 1994, another Wong Kar-wai poetic exploration of fleeting love, of serendipitous encounters, parallels Before Sunrise's focus on ephemeral moments. Wow, that's quite a string of films there to catch up to if you want to see some of the influences, perhaps.
Yeah, you're mentioning so many of my favorite films. Letter from an Unknown Woman from 1948 is, of course, also set in Vienna, and it has this scene in a fairground railway carriage, and you have to see that to understand where the opening sequence of Before Sunrise came from. And many of those films you're describing, they have they have a similar tone. They have a kind of a romantic resignation,
Right.
but they also have a sense of hoping against all the odds. The moments that we share might actually be special. And I think that's what Before Sunrise does. It's very much about sharing these moments and their potential and where they might go.
Sure.
And many of these films that you're describing do. Chunking Express is one of my all-time favorite films, which you've just mentioned. And that does the same in very meaningful and effective manner. Yeah.
What we've just done here, Rob, is laid such a strong case for how Linklater has done his homework.
Yeah.
You could tell he's seen all of these movies and he's drawn from the well.
Well, he's an absolute cinephile. There must be countless other influences under the surface too.
Sure.
As I said, I've met and interviewed Linklater twice for the first and second editions of my book. I did so in his offices in Austin. They are galleries of the most beautiful film posters that he collects and carefully frames. And you can tell his love of cinema is just everywhere in the films that he makes. And Before Sunrise is just bursting with this love of cinema.
No question about that. Let's talk a little bit about Richard Linklater himself. So, what directorial choices do you admire here, Rob? What Linklater qualities do you see shine through that make this Before Sunrise a distinctive work, one that reflects his style and his voice?
Leaving themes to the side for the moment, I'd have to say it's the subtlety. What Linklater is brilliant at is letting time take its course, in trusting his actors, in crafting each scene as a vignette, as I say, like a musical number, although without any singing or dancing. I've often wished Linklater would make a musical. School of Rock came close, but Before Sunrise, I think, is closer still. And now he's making Sometimes Merrily We Roll Along. He's making a little bit every year, which is worth waiting for, even though it's going to be 20 years worth. But, Before Sunrise is a low budget film, and many people make the mistake of thinking it's improvised. It's not. If it's a low budget film, you can't shoot and reshoot and reshoot. So it's filmed after a long period of writing and a long period of rehearsal.
Right. Yeah, this is an important point, right? Because you have to have a rock solid script. You can't just shoot on the fly. Hey, let's make something up as we go along. Maybe there's some improvisation. And, of course, the collaborative nature he has with his actors has been well demonstrated. But to your point, no, that screenplay has to be firmly embedded before the cameras roll.
Yeah, it has to be. And the actors need to have rehearsed it so much that it becomes second nature or even first nature, though.
Hmm.
It's shot, as I say, after a long period of writing and rehearsal. But what Linklater does is he still manages to capture a sense of energy. He captures a sense of spontaneity in the actors and how precious are the passing moments that they share. Whenever I see Before Sunrise, I kind of feel grateful that the camera was there, just to capture those fleeting,
Yeah,
unrepeatable moments
right.
between the actors. I always get the sense that if, they only happened once, and Linklater was a genius in being able to capture them on camera. I also greatly admire and enjoy his sleight of hand, as I've said, of creating a coherent trajectory around Vienna, and his attention to the themes that he adores as well, which keep coming back in his films. It takes really true artistry to sustain that career over so many years now. So many films which sustain similar themes, but they deepen them. They don't repeat themselves. They explore them in endlessly fascinating ways.
I love the word you used, subtle or subtlety, and I think
Subtlety,
that
yeah.
perfectly describes Linklater because if you look closely enough at enough of his films, he doesn't try to be flashy.
So,
He's not artsy fartsy. He doesn't go for complicated setups or experimental framing or elaborate camera movements, grandiose editing choices.
mm,
What does he do instead? Well, he and his crew, they keep the visuals simple in terms of shots, edits, camera placement. In fact, if you watch closely enough, he utilizes many extended takes that let the characters dominate the frame and that command our eyeballs,
yes.
allowing us to linger longer on them and identify the shared vibes without excessive editing manipulation. Good case in point here is I always think of the long, unbroken shot on the back of the tram that stretches over several minutes. And it really goes a long time. And if you look at the greats, I mean, of course, the master granddaddy of this approach is John Ford, where he will just let the camera linger for a long time. And
Hmm.
of course, famous for not shooting a lot of coverage. I don't know if that's true of Linklater, but the point is that he will often let his actors do the heavy lifting. So I think Linklater has studied from the feet of many masters. And then you think of the cinematography in his films, and this film in particular. There's that word again, subtly crafted, right? With long takes, with smooth tracking shots that let the actors' performances take center stage. I think this understated approach creates a sense of intimacy, almost as if you're right there besides Jesse and Celine.
Hmm.
You're quietly observing an authentic moment between two people. Like you just mentioned a moment ago, you're so grateful that the camera was there to capture it. That's kind of what I'm getting at. It feels like we're almost a fly on the wall in some way. But his well documented collaborative process also, of course, brings out rich, multidimensional performances from his actors, in this case, Delpy and Hawk, allowing their characters to feel alive and deeply relatable.
Hmm.
And then I'm always wowed by the closing montage in this film, where the camera revisits many of the spots previously traversed by Celine and Jesse. Now these areas, they're empty of any human occupants, and they showcase this director's innate flair for visual storytelling and emotionally tethering the audience to his characters. Again, it's just such a great way to wrap it up visually, and it speaks to the subtlety, but also he's done his homework. He's picked up little things from movies he's seen as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, it's. I think it comes to the fore in probably my favorite moment in the film, maybe even my favorite moment in any film, which is the scene in the listening booth.
Oh, sure.
There are so many moments I love, but if I choose the listening booth, it's one long take of them listening to a single track. It's Come
That's
Here
right.
by Bloom,
Mm-hmm.
with its slightly unsettling high key, but its wise lyrics. I think she sings, "I'm not impossible to touch. I've never wanted you so much." And Linklater shoots them very simply. He shoots them from a slightly lower angle as they take turns turning to look at each other while the other one looks away. So in terms of filmmaking, it combines two of the most important elements in filmmaking. One, as you've said, it's the long take, or what's sometimes referred to as a time image, but it's also the gaze, and this gaze that switches, that alternates between them.
Mm-hmm.
A long take is expressing duration or how long something lasts. It's becoming what the philosopher Gilles Deleuze called a time image, in which he says a little time in the purest state rises up to the surface of the screen. And we share that moment as it's happening. We share its duration with them. And then there's the gaze, which governs the structure of the shot. And this gaze that alternates between them, it carries desire and longing, but it's not quite able to believe the potential of this moment that they're sharing together. I think that's a perfect shot. It's beautifully constructed. It's unreal, of course. It's a metaphysical moment inside a larger metaphysical moment. It's a movement from reality to unreality and back again.
But again, the movies can do that. They can get away with that. We buy it.
Exactly. We buy it, yeah. And I think Linklater, of course, well, of course he does. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's making metaphysical moments within larger ones, within larger ones. And the whole thing is like peeling off an onion, until you get to the central point of the question, will they be together forever or not?
So well put. Absolutely. And I agree. I guess there are favorite moments from any movie that people will agree or disagree on, but most people, if you poll them, would probably say it's the record store scene.
I think so.
But I got to tell you, my favorite sequence overall is just the imaginary phone conversations toward the end. I love the dialogue there. It's so good.
I don't think I'm going to be able to make it for lunch today. I'm sorry. I met a guy on the train, and I got off with him in Vienna. We're still there.
Are you crazy?
Probably.
He's Austrian? He's from there?
No. He's passing through here, too. He's American. He's going back home tomorrow morning.
Why'd you get off the train with him?
Well, he convinced me. I mean, actually, I was ready to get off the train with him after talking to him a short while. He was so sweet, I couldn't help it. We were in the launch car, and he began to talk about him as a little boy seeing his great-grandmother's ghost. I think that's when I fell for him. Just the idea of this little boy with all those beautiful dreams. He trapped me.
Mm-hmm.
And he's so cute. He has beautiful blue eyes, nice pink lips, greasy hair. I love it. He's kind of tall and he's a little clumsy. I like to feel his eyes on me when I look away. He kind of kisses like an adolescent. It's so cute.
What?
Yeah, we kissed. It was so adorable. As the night went on, I began to like him more and more. But I'm afraid he's scared of me. I told him the story about the woman that kills our ex-boyfriend and stuff. He must be scared to death. He must be thinking I'm this manipulative, mean woman. I just hope he doesn't feel that way about me. Because you know me, I'm the most harmless person. The only person I could really hurt is myself.
I don't think he's scared of you. I think he's crazy about you.
Really?
I mean, I've known you a long time, and I got a good feeling. You gonna see him again?
We haven't talked about that yet. Okay, it's your turn. You call your friend. Okay?
All right.
Hi, dude. What's up?
Hey, Frank, how you been? I'm glad you're home.
Cool. Yeah.
I met somebody on my last night in Europe. Can you believe that?
That's incredible.
I know. And you know how they say we're all each other's demons and angels? Well, she was literally a Botticelli angel. Just telling me that everything was going to be okay.
I just imagine, like, wow, I wish I could have done that with some past relationships. That would have been a lot of fun. I just didn't have as much imagination or ingenuity to think of things like that. But it reveals so much.
But, students don't get that now. They don't know what they're doing, hanging up the phone. And
yeah, exactly.
It's like, what are they doing? That's what phones used to look like.
Oh, my goodness. It must be very interesting being a professor now and teaching younger generations. Yeah. Not throwing anybody under the bus, but yeah, just some practical matters of technology
that
come up in movies and discussions, sure.
Well, I mean, students can't believe that they didn't exchange numbers,
Right. Oh, I'm sure. That's a big bugaboo, I'm sure, among younger people. Like, what? How could they not do that? But again, folks, this is well before smartphones. Yeah. But, even if you wanted to write things down, they could have covered their tracks, Celine and Jesse. Mm-hmm. But this is part of the point, which we'll get to in the themes here in just a moment. Yeah. But yeah, what do you feel about the casting of Julie Delpy and Ethan Hawke in these roles? Do you believe they're ideal for these parts? And I'm not trying to give you a layup here. I mean, it's easy to say, of course, but it is a big risk for the filmmakers at the time. They had thought of some other names, and I know that there was a long casting decision from what I remember reading.
That's right.
But yeah, I mean, it wasn't a certainty, right? We hadn't really heard of these actors much before Sunrise.
No.
And yet the choices have acquitted themselves so tremendously.
Absolutely, of course, yeah. I mean, we know that the film is based on Linklater's own experience of meeting a young woman named Amy in Philadelphia in 1989. They walked around together, talking into the night. So it could have been, probably would have been, an all-American love story. And we know that Linklater spent several months trying to cast the film and that the characters changed a lot. His original low-budget idea was to film it in San Antonio, which is close to home in Texas. But then his visit to Vienna and the idea of an American abroad, which has a very rich history in American cinema, was boosted by meetings with and meetings between Hawke and Delpy. Now, Delpy is or was a child of the French New Wave. She was born in Paris in 1969, and her first feature role had been as a character called Wise Young Girl for the great French New Wave filmmaker Jean-Luc Godard, his film Detective.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And she was a real darling of the European art house already. She was very young, but she'd acted for Godard again in King Lear. She'd made films for Carlos Saura, Agnieszka Holland, and of course she'd become famous for appearing in the Three Colors trilogy by Kieślowski.
Absolutely.
She was in Three Colors White and then Three Colors Red in 1994, which is just a year before Sunrise.
I didn't mean to say that they were complete unknowns. I mean, they had both appeared in several movies before this, but they weren't on a lot of people's radars. I think we can agree.
No, I mean, Hawke had been a child actor in Joe Dante's Explorers, and then he really made his mark in Peter Weir's Dead Poets Society, and had a series of interesting character roles before I think it was Reality Bites in 1994 that made him a kind of a representative of Generation X. And again, that was 1 year before Sunrise. But putting Hawke and Delpy together, how can you explain that? It happened, it was magical. They bring wonderful contrasts to the film. As the dialogue notes, when Celine says that, up in the Ferris wheel, she was this old woman kissing this young boy. And they play into these tremendous contrasts, and it adds so many levels to the film. So he's a romantic who tries to be cynical. She's a cynic who wants to be romantic.
Yep.
He's a fresh American. She's an ancient European. He's American independent cinema, and she's the European art house. He's cocky and clumsy like a puppy, and she's exquisitely beautiful and wary like a cat. The whole thing is a seduction and a courtship in which they both know the basic dance moves, but they're both choosing to improvise as well. Again, another reason why it feels to me so much like a musical, a magical musical. Is it a fluke? It's the most beautiful fluke in cinema, I think, to have cast those two together. It just works so well.
But yet, as is true in so many great films, it seems like these actors were born for these roles. Like, how can you envision anyone else? Well, I mean, It wasn't a guarantee, like we said. It wasn't a gimme. But as you articulated so well, I mean, Hawke organically imbues Jesse with this worldly but tolerable cynicism, and Delpy effortlessly inhabits the more romantic and perhaps soul-searching Celine.
Yes.
But they exhibit undeniable chemistry. That's the point. And that's evidenced by, as we said, the record store scene, other scenes. But the rhythm and timing of that record store scene is, to me, what was required for that nonverbal interplay to seamlessly work. I think it speaks to the talents of and shared trust between Delpy and Hawke. I don't know how many takes they had to do, but it just feels like it was a one-take perfect kind of a thing. And that's what I want to believe, because it just looks and feels so real and organic.
That's it exactly. I mean, it's a romantic film, it's a musical film, but it's also very funny. And one of the things that we should note is that both Delpy and Hawke have tremendous comic timing in the film. One of my favorite moments is when Celine is just about to get off the train, and she looks both ways and she pauses just a second before taking what's really a leap into the unknown. I was watching it last night, and she reminds me of Neil Armstrong landing on the moon. She takes this leap into another world. And there are so many moments I love where you see the comic timing. I love Hawke, Jesse. I think there's a bit where Jesse is, when they've just met and they're trying to make small talk, and he's crossing this bridge and he says, "Hey, this is a nice bridge." And then he cringes at his own clumsiness. He can't believe he said something like that. It's a very, very funny film. And I think it's the comic timing that works so well between them as well.
What I love about it is it's not trying to go for the broad strokes, the big knee-slapping laughs. Now, I'm not saying that would have hurt the picture. But again, the word subtle. It's more of a kind of subdued or lower key humor to me, which feels more believable, right? It's not like an overwritten big joke movie where there's, oh God, I love that scene where they have the pratfall and then he makes the joke about blah, blah, blah. No, it's not that kind of a movie. The humor is going to be a little bit more low key, but we remember it. And you just brought up a few good examples of it.
What are your favorite moments? It's the listening booth, and what else?
Like I said, the phone conversation.
Yeah.
There's so many to nominate. My goodness. I love the uncertainty of knowing whether or not they consummated their relationship. I mean, to me, that's pretty brilliant.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you see it for the first time and you never see the sequels, you think, okay, well, he, of course, was respectful of her wish not to have sex.
Yeah.
But you learn later in their conversations in the sequels that, he remembers doing the deed, and she kind of says, no, I don't think we did, right? And so
that's right.
There's an element of doubt, but yet I just love how it's not the obligatory sex scene where, oh yeah, of course they're going to, it's so romantic, it's in the park.
Yeah.
They only have a few hours left. It's of course they're going to have sex.
Yes.
Again, I admire that so much. And it's not just about, maintaining the purity or the mystery of the relationship, although there is that element too. But again, it's not the obvious and the expected. And there's a lot of choices that Linkletter and the collaborators make here that are so refreshing, so different, things that you wouldn't expect. There are so many different moments and scenes to nominate, aren't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's very difficult to pass the film because it exists as a whole, but it also exists in conjunction and in relation to the sequels as well. So it's very difficult to.
I know. And I know that I'm tasking you with something difficult too here, where we're just focusing on this one movie. Now, we have referenced some of the sequels, but for those who haven't seen the sequels, it's okay. If you never see them, well, I think you're missing out, but this movie can exist unto itself.
Yeah, it can. Although, of course, the dialogue between them is wonderful to experience too. Watching Before Sunrise, one of the most important themes is there's a tension there between intuition and the intellect. It's the conflict between feeling your way into something and then thinking about it, your different understandings.
Yeah, you're so right.
And so like the setup is intellectual. We know from the start of Before Sunrise that Jesse has to catch his plane. So he operates, he's servile to this man-made schedule. You know all of this, minutes, hours, and months. It's just an invention. It's a man-made structure. But then they engage in this metaphysical experience of spending the night together, and they break free of all this. They wander, they drift, they know that their time is unreal, until there's a horrible moment when Jesse notices and says, damn, we're back in real time in the morning.
Yeah.
And real time intrudes and it claims them. She hurries off to catch a train. He heads off to catch his plane. And of course, the sequel is worth seeing, especially Before Sunset, because it learns from that mistake and it reverses it. Before Sunset has exactly the same setup. Jesse has to leave to catch a plane, but the film reverses it. It lets an intuitive sense of time triumph over the man-made intellectual timetable that scuppered the romance in Before Sunrise.
Yeah, they're of a piece, folks. Let's be honest here. It's best to see all three in order and to not miss the sequels. We should talk now about themes. Yeah, what messages, subtexts, morals to the story? What themes emerge after watching Before Sunrise? Boy, there can be many, many of them. We've already touched on a few of them, but let's get into it. So what would you say here?
I teach this film a lot, and the critical framework I use, it's relation to the philosophy of a British sociologist called Anthony Giddens. And he wrote a wonderful book, and he says that essentially our identities are no longer given or withheld, but our identities are discovered, constructed, and actively sustained. And I think you can read this in the film. Before Sunrise is about discovery. This fascinating idea that the meeting of one's soulmate in a perfect place at the perfect time and the discovery of one's own identity in that interaction and dialogue is actually possible. Whereas Sunset is about construction, about making the conditions that make a dream life, a second chance at a dream life possible. But of course, all of this comes at a price, this discovery and acting on the potential of each moment. And one of the themes which I think comes into play is what the Czech author Milan Kundera called the unbearable lightness of being, the title of one of his great works. And this is the simple knowledge that in any and every one of those moments, each of us faces an infinite number of choices of what to do next. But in the moment we make the choice, all of those infinite other choices disappear.
Yes.
I mean, who can live like that? Well, we all do.
We have to. We got no choice.
We have to. And I think that's what Before Sunrise is about. It's the series of choices that these people make and the consequences and what happens to them because of them. And some of the choices they make are wonderful, like Celine choosing to get off the train. And some of the choices they make are terrible, like choosing to separate at the end. But the immense beauty, the wisdom, and the generosity of Before Sunrise, I think, is that it suggests that we can sometimes make the right choice. And I think that's what I find the most sustaining and heartening about the film, that sometimes we can actually make the right choice.
Wow. Well, none of these are on my checklist. I got to be honest with you. You're making me think a lot harder about what this movie is essentially about. I guess there's an infinite number of answers. But yeah, what else is on your docket there? Like when you teach this film, what else do you talk about with the class?
Oh, we talk about everything that you've mentioned, the idea of romance and the potential of it, the metaphysical ideas, the metaphorical sense of how we can read the film as this dialogue between American and European cinema, between the old world and the new. There are so many things. And then the great thing about it, of course, is that it's an inspiring film, and students come back at me with their own ideas of what it means, and they read new things into it.
Wow. So is this actually an experience where maybe the student teaches the teacher a little bit? Like, wow, I never thought about it that way. Yeah, you get a new idea introduced by one of your pupils, perhaps.
Oh, that happens a lot. And I'm always very honest. Whenever I write my books, I always put in the acknowledgements to say thanks to my, the brilliant students who took part in my seminars and just sent me off on all these different tangents and trajectories.
Oh, that's so
Great
cool.
new ideas.
Yeah. No, that's great that you do that. But also that again, we're enlightened by, in your case, the people you're teaching. So that's fantastic to hear.
Mm-hmm.
But it also speaks to how revelatory and inspirational this movie can continue to be with new generations, where you can continually discover new things about it, come to different realizations.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the big ones, one of the prevailing themes is, of course, seeking permanence in a world of impermanence, of inevitable change and death.
Mm-hmm.
Here I'm gonna quote, this is Slant magazine critic Dan Jardine. The couple's conversation is preoccupied with death, transience, and the fragility of life. The couple search for evidence of things that can persist, staying awake in defiance of that harbinger of mortality, the night, hoping to cheat the death of each day by stealing the time that they shouldn't even be having together. Their conversations inevitably swing back to all the proofs that they see around them of the ephemeral, particularly in the realm of human relationships where nothing sticks, where disintegration and collapse seem to be the norm. I really like that quote, but it also just ties into how Before Sunrise, it examines the temporal constraints of our existence, as you so articulately expressed earlier, as well as the fleeting nature of time, right? The ephemeral 12 hours the characters spend together, it underscores how quickly life goes by and how fast an opportunity can pass.
Yeah.
And it's just wonderful how time itself is a thematic element and motif constantly revisited in the film. You think of how Jesse refers to their brief encounter, as you said, as a kind of time travel experiment. He remarks,
You know what drives me crazy?
What?
There's all these people talking about how great technology is and how it saves all this time. Mm-hmm. But what good is saved time if nobody uses it? If it just turns into more busy work?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you never hear somebody say, well, with the time I've saved by using my word processor, I'm going to go to a Zen monastery and hang out. You don't hear that.
Tell me so abstract anyway.
and then you recall how Celine talks about the dead girl's gravesite in the cemetery. She says,
She was only 13 when she died. That meant something to me, I was that age when I first saw this. Now I'm 10 years older and she's still 13, I guess. That's funny.
Jesse comments,
I mean, just once, I'd love to see some little old lady save up all her money, to go to the fortune teller, and she'd get there all excited about hearing her future, and the woman would say, tomorrow and all your remaining days will be exactly like today. A tedious collection of hours.
That's one of my favorite quotes and a great example of some of the comedy in the movie. One particular conversation suggests that the couple is trying to thwart time and explore beyond the confines of temporal existence, even if momentarily, and that is this. Jesse says,
I feel like this is some dream world we're in,
Yeah, it's so weird. It's like our time together is just ours. It's our own creation. It must be like I'm in your dream and you in mine or something.
Mm-hmm. And what's so cool is that this whole evening, all our time together, shouldn't officially be happening.
Yeah, I know. Maybe that's why this feels so otherworldly. But then the morning comes and we turn into pumpkins, right?
Another great exchange there talking about time. And then you consider how Jesse quotes Auden, his poem As I Walked Out One Evening.
All the clocks in the city began to whir and chime. Oh, let not time deceive you. You cannot conquer time. In headaches and in worry, vaguely life leaks away. And time will have his fancy, tomorrow or today.
So again, a strong preoccupation with time, and time itself becomes this motif throughout the film.
Yes, absolutely. That's such an amazing poem. And of course, he reads it, and he imitates Dylan Thomas when he reads it. That's the voice he puts on. Yeah, I mean, this is why the film is so wonderfully metaphysical. It's the whole film is a movement away from reality to this unreality that they both recognise as the night is going on. That they've moved into a different sense of reality, but of course they come back to it by the morning. So in one sense, it's also kind of like a fairy tale. They turn back into pumpkins. But it's also real. It did actually happen. Jesse and Celine did actually meet as soulmates on this one perfect night in Vienna. And the film has lots of references to this in the dialogue, this movement from reality to unreality, and then,
Sure.
sadly perhaps, back to reality at the end.
Yeah, Before Sunrise, it also espouses the perks of living life spontaneously, of seizing the moment, of carpe diem. You ponder how the couple adapts to their limited environment. They act uninhibitedly despite these limitations. So like both Celine and Jesse decide on the spur of the moment to depart the train, to forget their rules and restrictions. They also randomly encounter 3 artists along their travel: a palm reader, a street poet, and a belly dancer. What do? They spontaneously engage with each of them and their art.
Yes.
And the film also questions the unpredictable nature of fate versus happen chance. The question that arises to me is, were Celine and Jesse destined to meet like star-crossed lovers, or was this just a random event that won't mean much in the scope of their lives? Well, of course, you'll need to conveniently forget about the sequels for this query to be fully explored. But again, if you're seeing this movie for the first time and you don't know the sequels exist, this question is relevant.
Of course it's relevant. I mean, even if no sequels ever existed, we would still know by the end of Before Sunrise that they both kind of ruined each other for other people, haven't they? They're never going to get over that one perfect night.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen.
A couple other themes to chew on. Avoiding relationship rigor mortis is how I would put it,
Yeah.
because the pair discuss how, as couples age together, they can lose the ability to hear each other. But the beauty here in this setup is that Celine and Jesse attempt to avoid this inevitable problem by spending only one night together.
Yes.
The sequels prove there's more to the story. But again, they're worried about what happens to relationships over time. And then another theme is, of course, the power of play acting. There's a lot of that going on in this movie. And here I'm going to quote Dennis Lim, who was on our show actually a few years ago. In his Criterion Collection essay, he said this: Jesse and Celine move past initial awkwardness by implicitly acknowledging the role-playing aspect of their impromptu date. He initiates a question-and-answer game in which they take turns quizzing each other about sex and love. The verbal seduction drifts into strategic thought experiments. What would happen on an island with 99 men and 1 woman, with 99 women and 1 man? That allow the opinionated twosome to get a fix on their respective worldviews. Late into the night, with time running out, they again use the indirection of play as disinhibitor and armor. Now, Lim is referencing in that last exchange there the famous role-playing scene toward the end of the movie, as I said, involving imaginary phone calls. And to me, it's enthralling how Jesse has to stay in character as Celine's pretend friend while Celine speaks positive and negative words about him. It's a clever way for both to reveal things about each other without discussing them directly, right?
Yeah.
And if you think about play acting, like in another scene, Jesse and Celine, what do? They pretend being on their honeymoon. Jesse says, I always think I'm this 13-year-old boy that doesn't really know how to be an adult, pretending to live my life, taking notes for when I'll really have to do it. Celine, as you said, she's engrossed with finality and death, and she says,
I always have this strange feeling that I'm this very old woman laying down about to die.
So again, play acting, role playing is at the heart of the film as well.
Yeah, it's very much about how we present ourselves to other people. We may want to impress them, we may want to seduce them, and it's very much about all these different layers, these layers of performance. But of course, as the film progresses, these layers kind of fall away.
Right.
And you end up with them simply embracing each other on the train station as they're about to part. Neither of them have words to express how they're feeling. When he eventually blurts out that, okay, forget this, let's meet again, she breaks down and says, she couldn't say it. And she was so glad that he did. And then they have this fumbled attempt to arrange a second date. And it is very much about this. It's about, we kind of overburden ourselves with all of these levels of interpretation, these levels of performance. But something like this, meeting someone with whom we connect on a really deep and profound level, all those levels fall away, all those layers kind of fall away, and we end up exposing ourselves and becoming very vulnerable. And I think that comes through at the end of Before Sunrise. It's the vulnerability of both of those characters after having left behind all of their trauma, their neurosis, their pretense,
Yes.
their affectations, their pretension, all of that just falls away, and we're just left with two people who connect.
I'm so glad you brought that up. It's a great example of stripping it down to the essentials. Okay, you guys are out of time now. Enough of the role playing.
Yeah.
It's a practical matter of what's going to happen. The train's about to leave.
Yeah.
And that feels so real. And the way that it's executed and acted and delivered, it's pitch perfect to me. It speaks to the immediacy, the urgency of their situation. It feels just very believable.
Mm-hmm.
One more thing we have to mention before we close the book on themes is, of course, the great quote by Celine, where she says,
You know, I believe if there's any kind of God, it wouldn't be in any of us. Not you or me, but just this little space in between. If there's any kind of magic in this world, it must be in the attempt of understanding someone, sharing something. I know, it's almost impossible to succeed, but who cares, really? The answer must be in the attempt.
So to me, this speaks to the transformative power of genuine human intimacy, Rob.
Mm-hmm.
It suggests that divinity and meaning, they lie not within individuals, but in the shared connections between them, emphasizing the intangible beauty of trying to understand and relate to other people. It celebrates the effort to connect as inherently valuable, even if perfect understanding is unattainable. What are your thoughts here on that quote? It's very deep and philosophical, but it's also spiritual.
It's spiritual as well, but it also connects with the idea that we have to act on those impulses.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's like what you said, it sees the day. If we recognize something, we have to act on it. It's not simply recognizing that there is a space between us, but it's the attempt to elide this gap, the attempt to share something with someone and try to understand it. I think it's a deeply philosophical idea, and I think Delpy delivers it with such grace in the film. It's an extraordinary scene, and it's going back to the students. It's often the bit of dialogue that they pick up on the most. When I teach this film to students, I say to them, I give them an exercise, and I ask them to choose a line of dialogue which for them was the most impactful, which had the most kind of philosophical weight. And a large number of them, choose that line of dialogue.
Isn't it telling that after she's done speaking, Jesse has absolutely nothing to say. He's speechless.
Nothing to say.
He's speechless. And in almost every exchange they have, there's a back and forth, and there is no back and forth there. He is just left to contemplate, and I think he's just in awe.
Yeah, and I think Linklater is too. Linklater, when she's finished speaking, he cuts to a shot which is much further away. It leaves them there, and it holds the shot for several seconds before then gradually catching its breath and moving on to the next scene.
Yeah.
It's a showstopper. It's a musical. It's a showstopper. It's the one that you really need to catch your breath after that line of dialogue.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And a movie just replete with themes and ideas. This is yet one more example, but perhaps the greatest example of deeper thought, of how relationships, conversations, dialogue can be more than just superficial. And it speaks to the power of what Before Sunrise has to say to us. So it is this movie's 30th birthday, Rob.
Yeah.
Birthdays are a time for giving presents, only it's the movie lovers who continue to receive the gifts. That's what Cineversary is all about. This is why we exist here as a podcast. So, what is this film's greatest gift to viewers?
I think what Before Sunrise gives us, if it's the birthday of Before Sunrise, but if it gives us a present, I think it's this sense, the knowledge that we can transcend our ordinary lives. It gives us the promise that the metaphysical is within our reach, that our soulmates do exist, that magic is possible. And it may seem a fantasy, it may seem a fairy tale, it may seem like a Hollywood romantic comedy or musical, but I think Before Sunrise still kind of whispers to you that, this is possible. And I think that's the beauty of the film, that's the magic of it. I think we still find ourselves believing in the metaphysical experience of Jesse and Celine.
Absolutely.
I know I certainly do. It gives us the knowledge that we can transcend our ordinary lives. I think that's its greatest gift to us. That all of these romantic cliches, which are cliches for a reason, about meeting your soulmate and dancing off into the night, I think it rescues them from banality. And it says that, magic is possible. And I love it for that reason. I'm totally convinced by it. And every time I watch it, I'm open to being even further convinced. I think it's a magnificent gift that this film gives us. It's a sense, a knowledge that the metaphysical is absolutely within our reach.
Hear, hear. Well said. But I thought long and hard about this because this is a movie that really it deserves to be thought long and hard about. Let's be honest. Mm-hmm. I think Before Sunrise's best gift, best bestowal to fans is that incredibly credible conversation and intellectually stimulating dialogue. It's the screenwriting, it's the dialogue. It's just scintillating. The discourse between Celine and Jesse plays as realistic and authentic And that's evidenced by its occasional stream of consciousness circuitousness, its focus on the mundane as well as the momentous, its mining of deeply philosophical matters, its lack of florid, overscripted language, the absence of audience-friendly one-liners and groan-worthy catchphrases. None of that crap is here. Here's a rare film romance, Rob, that touches the head as well as the heart. It's a fresh-scented falling-in-love drama that avoids cheap mawkishness and predictable tropes, and that's really important, I think. But it's often what's not spoken aloud that further cement this as a masterwork. Before Sunrise boasts possibly the best falling-in-love moment in cinema history, and that's the wordless sequence in the record shop, when, fascinatingly, as they listen to a Kath Bloom folk song, each character keeps stealing quick glances at the other with their eyes, never meeting. That's amazing. They keep looking at each other, but then their eyes never actually connect in that wordless scene. And it later features one of the best kissing scenes ever in the movies, their first lip lock on the Ferris wheel. A later osculation when Jesse asks, "Can I tell you a secret?" and then he quickly leans in and steals a smooch. To me, that's equally memorable. I wish I could have used that in my wooing days. That's a great one, I got to tell you. Before Sunrise, to me, Rob, it's all the more amorously imbued because it's set before the ubiquity of smartphones, and that makes the uncertainty of their future rendezvous at the conclusion more gripping, more heartfelt. What can be more romantic than, at the conclusion, not sharing their last names or contact information and simply promising to rendezvous in 6 months at the place they first met? That says it all to me. So, many greatest gifts. It's the movie that keeps on giving.
Yeah, absolutely. To everything you've just said. Couldn't agree more.
So, Rob, what are you currently working on that listeners should know about?
Well, thanks for asking. I wrote the second edition of my book on Linklater that came out in 2018 because I hadn't been able to include Before Midnight or Boyhood in the first.
Okay.
So that's out there. And I followed that with a book dedicated to another film I love, which is Greta Gerwig's Lady Bird. And that book, called Lady Bird, Self-Determination for a New Century, that was published by Longman in 2022. But I'm currently writing the book I've always wanted to write, and that's a revisionist account of American independent cinema since the 1990s, in which Linklater and Before Sunrise figure, of course. But I'm doing that through the lens of philosophy and trying to understand the different philosophies that go into it. That book's called Imagined Life, and if all goes well and I get the time to write it, it'll be published by Edinburgh University Press late next year or perhaps early 2027.
Still in the works. Fantastic. That's quite a broad canvas there if you're talking about independent cinema. Is it world independent cinema or just American?
I tend to work a lot on the dynamics of world cinema. I've published quite a bit on that, but then my particular interest and I suppose expertise looks at American independent cinema. Yeah. And so this book I'm writing at the moment, it starts really with Slacker, and then it moves through the next 30 years, and it looks at filmmakers like Kelly Reichardt and Sean Baker and Greta Gerwig and Mumblecore and many others. And it's about tracking commonalities of philosophies and trying to work out their political ideas as well as the philosophical ones. And I'm having the greatest time. I've always wanted to write this book, and I'm just really enjoying it.
I'll bet. Yeah. No, you sound like the perfect guy to put that together. And it sounds like you're giving it the gestation period it needs. So not rushing anything, letting it all come together. And maybe we'll see that, as you said, next year or the year after.
I hope so. Yeah, thanks. I'll send you a copy.
Oh, that would be wonderful. I'd love to check that out. We can tell that you're a lover of all things Linklater and the perfect subject matter expert for this particular film. I'm just so grateful we had a chance to chat at length about Before Sunrise on its 30th birthday. Thanks again for appearing on Cineversary.
Thanks very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. It really has. Really delighted to talk to you, a fellow fan.
Love talking at length with Rob about this film. He was the perfect guest to go wading through the weeds with me about all things Before Sunrise, right? Gratitude galore, Mr. Stone. Thanks again. Did you know that Cineversary has its own website? That's right, we actually now have a vanity URL that's easy to remember, which will take you to a freshly designed portal where you can quickly access the latest episode of your favorite podcast, as well as all of our previous installments. Now it's a lot easier to spread the good word about our show to your friends and family. You simply tell them to visit Cineversary.com. Pretty simple, right? That's Cineversary.com. We also have a custom email address just for you. Now, if you ever want to share feedback on our show or offer suggestions for future installments, or maybe you just have a question about Cineversary, send it to us at cineversarypodcast@gmail.com. Also, you can really help our show grow by spreading the good word about the Cineversary show to your peeps. Even better, please leave a positive online review and rating, which significantly helps us to get discovered by new listeners. So if you use Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Castbox, some of these other services, simply search for the Cineversary page, look for a link that says something like ratings or reviews, click that link, and leave a review and or rating. While you're at it, take a moment to like us on Facebook. We also have a presence on Twitter. Our handle is @CineversaryPod, where you can easily tweet or follow us. And if you want to go an extra step in your support of our show and help keep us ad-free, please consider making a monetary donation to the Cineversary podcast by visiting tinyurl.com/donate-cineversary. We really appreciate your support. Lastly, have you checked out my Cineverse Group website? Yeah, it's easy to get confused by these similar sounding names: Cineversary, Cineverse, Tomato. But Cineverse is actually the name of my private film discussion group I founded back in 2005 that continues to meet weekly on Zoom. Every week, the Cineverse group watches, researches, and discusses a different movie, and I create a summary write-up, call it a mini essay if you will, on that movie that gets posted to the Cineverse group blog. So if you want to enjoy reading in-depth content that examines different discussion-worthy motion pictures, including classic Hollywood films, independent features, foreign masterworks, modern movies, and silent era standouts, then visit cineversegroup.com, simply spelled CINEVERSE group.com. Fun fact, every posted article on cineversegroup.com includes a link to a recording of our group discussion of that particular film, with me leading the conversation as moderator. So if you like what I'm doing on the Cineversary podcast, you might also want to give a listen to some of our Cineverse group recordings, which are podcasts of a different sort. Again, head over to cineversegroup.com, where you can check out some interesting text and audio content on a variety of films, not necessarily celebrating a milestone anniversary. Next up, I had the great privilege of speaking with this movie's co-screenwriter, which made for quite the enthralling chat. It's my pleasure to introduce writer, actress, and teacher Kim Krizan, who co-wrote the screenplay for Before Sunrise, for which she and Richard Linklater were nominated for an Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay, as well as a Writers Guild Award. Now, Kim has also played several different characters in Linklater films like Slacker, Dazed and Confused, and Waking Life. She's also authored a few books. One is Original Sins, Trade Secrets of the Femme Fatale, as well as Spy in the House of Anais Nin. And she currently teaches a creative writing class online via Patreon. Hello, Kim. Welcome to Cineversary.
Hi, Eric. I'm happy to be here with you. Thank you.
As am I. Thank you so much for saying yes and climbing aboard the Cineversary train. Yeah, we're rumbling out of the station here, and that's, I guess, a fitting metaphor, considering the movie we're talking about, which, of course, starts with a train sequence, a very famous one. Wow, it is a great privilege not only to be able to talk to you today, but also to discuss this movie, which, boy, I got to tell you, it has really risen in the ranks in my own personal pantheon of favorite dramas, romances. You could even call it a comedy to some extent, so there's no wrong answer here. But yes, it has really grown in esteem Before Sunrise. And I'm sure a lot of other people can attest and agree with me on this. Even people in my own family. My son, proudly, he got a copy of the screenplay with your signature and Richard's signature on it. He bears that proudly in his bedroom. So there you go. My 18-year-old son is a huge fan of this film, too.
I love that. I love that. I really like that age. I like 18-year-olds and I like 20-year-olds. I like people in their early 20s. And for some reason, the movie seems to really resonate with them because I think they're all starting off on their metaphorical train journey and they're going to be meeting people on that train and stopping off at different fascinating locations. So I really like the fact that your son likes the movie, and I like the metaphor of the train that you started with. So wonderful.
Good way to kick things off. So let's get right into it, shall we? Tell us how you got involved with this film and with director Richard Linklater. When and why you decided to collaborate and what the writing process was like.
So I had been in his film Slacker, and that was his first film, and it was really a huge accident because a friend of mine told me that someone in town, and that at the time was Austin, Texas, someone told me that there was a young fledgling filmmaker who was auditioning for a movie. And my friend thought it was a student film, and he said I should go audition for it. And I had never acted before, and so I said to my friend, "Well, that's ridiculous. I've never been in, I've never auditioned for anything." And he said, "Oh, you should go do it anyway." I did. I went and auditioned, and I got a part in Slacker, and that's how I met Richard Linklater. And while the audition was actually not acting in a scene, it was just him asking me about my life. And at the time, I was writing my master's thesis on the diarist Anna East Nin, and he seemed very curious about that. I discovered that Rick is a curious person who's just interested in learning about people and what they're into.
Yeah, you could tell that if you watch enough of his movies. He has that natural curiosity about human beings, life, existence, etc.
Yeah, and yes, and they're different viewpoints, and so I think he likes to learn from different people. And so I was in Slacker, and he asked me if he could read my master's thesis when I was done with it. And I really thought he was just being polite, but he kept asking me and asking me. And in the meantime, he put me in his movie Dazed and Confused as the teacher who does the bicentennial spiel.
Hey guys, one more thing. Hey, this summer, when you're being inundated with all this American bicentennial 4th of July brouhaha, don't forget what you're celebrating, and that's the fact that a bunch of slave-owning, aristocratic white males didn't want to pay their taxes.
Yeah! Oh, yeah.
He asked me, are you done with your thesis? And I said I was, and I gave it to him. He read it immediately and asked to meet me. So between my giving it to him and meeting him, it was only a couple days, but when I went to meet him, it was in a restaurant in Austin called Mother's. And I went to Mother's, and he was sitting there with my thesis sitting on the table. And I sat down, and he said, I read it. Would you write a movie with me?
Oh, my goodness. Wow. And did you have any inkling that this question was going to get popped up?
No, none whatsoever. I was a little bit surprised to see him sitting there with the thesis. I thought that was interesting.
Mm.
And I told him I have never written a film before. I don't know what, besides the script for Dazed and Confused, I had really never written or I never read a screenplay before.
Mm.
I was a literature major, so I had read plays, and I had read, a gazillion novels and short stories.
Right. But as you and I both know, a screenplay, even just the formatting and the look of it and the structure is so different from a traditional play.
Completely different, very visual, right?
Mm-hmm.
Play really focuses so much on dialogue, and a film script, as you know, is very visual. And so I told him I've never written. He says, "Oh, it doesn't matter. You can write." I was like, "Well, okay." And he said, "Well, listen, I have to finish post-production on Dazed and Confused. I will let you know when I'm done, and we'll do it." And so I was really hoping this would happen. And then Dazed and Confused came out. We had the big party for Dazed and Confused coming out and the premiere and everything. He called me. He said, "I'm ready to roll." He said, "How about I come over to your place?" And he is a guy who likes to work at night, which is fine. So we were in my living room, and at first we were just talking and taking notes and writing in our notebooks. But right away, I knew that he wanted some sort of a boy meets girl story, and that's all I knew. And he had not hadn't had any kind of romance
Mm-hmm.
yet. He'd had Slacker, which, as you know, is just very, very arty movie with a wide cast of characters. And Dazed and Confused, once again, an ensemble piece about students graduating, their last day of high school. So he had not written a romance. And I said on that very first night, because I knew that he liked a story that has a finite time frame. And in the case of Slacker, it was one night or I guess, pretty much a 24-hour period. And Dazed and Confused, very similar.
Right.
So I thought, well, you know what, Rick? I have traveled alone by train, and it's really interesting because you get on the train, sometimes someone interesting gets on and sits across from you. You have a conversation with them. Sometimes it's just that, or sometimes you're both getting off at the same stop, and then you decide, "Hey, let's pal around and go sightseeing or something." And he was like, "Great. That's great. Let's do that." So that is how the whole thing happened.
That is amazing. That's an incredible story. And I'm curious how much of the setup that you just described, and for that matter, maybe the character of Celine, was autobiographical.
Well, I would say she was because we were both writing out of ourselves,
Hmm.
really. And I mean, I suppose at some point there may have been deviations, but when the actors got involved, there were some deviations. But as we were writing, we were really writing as if we had met on a train. And the thing is that Rick and I at that point were friends. We were good conversationalists, and we were both very curious and interested in ideas. And,
Sure.
hey, what are you reading? What are you reading? What have you seen in the lately? That kind of a thing. What are you interested in these days? Who are your favorite philosopher? Blah, blah, blah.
Right.
We found it very natural to just fall into that sort of conversation.
Yeah. So it sounds like it was an organic kind of synergistic relationship as far as the writing partnership. So, real quick, going back to my previous question, I'm curious, did this happen to you on a train? You said you had experience, traveling abroad using a rail. Did you meet, for example, a gentleman on the train and you kind of sparked a little romance? I'm just curious.
Well, definitely not to the extent of the Before Sunrise story, but I had met people that I would say just pal around with for the day. I met a newlywed couple, and we palled around for the day and went to Stonehenge. I met a guy when I was traveling in Europe from Spain all the way through France, and we both got off. He was going up to his home country in Norway, and we got together in Paris because I was stopping in Paris, and he just had I can't remember how many hours his layover in Paris was before his next train, but we went sightseeing in Paris. And there was a girl I met in Ireland. She was Irish. First of all, we stayed in a youth hostel, and then we went sightseeing and went to visit friends of hers. So I had had various friends that I met with, but you have to understand that this was before the internet. So we did not expect anything to continue, say, via social media.
Hmm.
We were ships passing in the night, and it may have been that we exchanged names, addresses, things like that. But we definitely did not exchange anything beyond a address because telephone calls were very, very expensive.
Sure.
And you wouldn't be calling someone in Europe just to say, "Hey, you," the way you would on the internet, the way you would just send a direct message. You would not have that kind of a relationship.
This is part of what makes the film such a timeless romance now, is that it's anchored in that period of time, of course, before modern technology, cell phones, etc. So, for example, if this film had never been made or was being remade, let's say, heaven forbid, how do you get around the cell phone problem, right? How do you get around the social media problem? So I think that adds so much charm to the film and romance, if you will, that they are captive to their time and their era as far as the limits of technology, the limits of being able to communicate long distance. So interesting. You were laying that it sounds like you drew from your experiences, your recollections of meeting these different people. Maybe they became an amalgamation of what they ended up talking about and experiencing. Is that fair to say?
Yes, and using some poetic license to make things, a true romance happen where the characters really connect, which I think is often sometimes a quick sort of thing where you see someone and you're like, "Ooh, gosh, that person really does it for me."
Sure.
You know, I find that person very attractive, and then maybe you talk to them briefly
Hmm.
and you're like, gosh, I like their voice, I like the way they speak, I like, they see I just feel it right away.
And so much of it, wouldn't you agree, is the joie de vivre, the beauty, the immediacy of being young and being smitten with somebody like that. It's about being young. I mean, not to say that older people can't re-experience things while they're watching Before Sunrise. I think it's a timeless movie for any age, relatively speaking. But again, being that particular age or that part of your life where you can be smitten in a quick way.
Oh, absolutely, and I think there's something about being in transit. There's an openness, and when you're in a foreign environment,
Hmm.
your senses are very alive because you cannot sort of go on autopilot. You have to be very aware, just as an animal moving through the world. You have to have your eyes open, your ears open. You're noticing what's going on around you, just
Certainly.
not only for interest and curiosity, and you're in a new environment and oh gosh, these people in this country are interesting and listen to the accents, but also you're in a foreign place. You have to be awake and aware. And so then you'll be aware of the people coming around you on the train. Is this
Sure.
person interesting, safe? I mean, any number of things. And I think the young people, like you used the word romance, and that's a good word. I think that they are so embroiled in their phones that in a sense they love the romance of really being tuned into your environment the way perhaps we used to be,
Right, right.
right? Because nowadays, I mean, it's kind of amazing to me to walk down the street and see young people engrossed in their phones, and I think, gosh, you really ought to, like, look at who's around you,
Yes.
Well,
Don't get me started, Kim.
yes, yeah, right, I mean, just as a safety matter, but also as a just, tuning into your environment, and there is a romance to it that I think young people are really like, "Gosh, what was that like?" I'm
Absolutely.
finding so many young people I meet romanticize the pre-internet era.
Yeah, and I think that's why this film. I can't speak for my son, and he's a small sample size. He's just one person, but I have a feeling that there again. I'll use that word charm of, wow. I wonder what it would be like to encounter someone spontaneously, like on a train abroad, for example, and not be looking at your phone and not be swiping left or right on some dating site. Maybe you're going to France and you've agreed to meet somebody, a blind date or something. No, it's again, I think that they're a little bit removed with the technology.
Absolutely.
But hey, you have the ability to turn the phone off. And maybe that's part of what you weren't thinking about that when you were writing it 30 years ago. But today, little messages like that can creep in too. Remember, you have the agency to go back in time, if you will, and experience a romantic experience old school.
Absolutely,
Hmm.
absolutely. So, you know what that makes me think is that while I was on the train, going from Spain into France and all the way up to Paris,
Yeah.
I was talking to this Norwegian guy, and he was, about my age, very attractive to me. We were sitting across from one another. We had a long conversation, and at some point, he got up to use the restroom, and I had not seen him stand and move because we had both been sitting across from one another. And when he got up to stand and move, I saw that his arm was a little bit crumpled and he had a pretty severe limp.
Mm.
He looked at me a little sheepishly when he returned, and he explained to me that he had had a stroke when he was 25 years old,
Ah.
that he had been a professional athlete, and he had had a stroke, just like a freak thing, that had ended his athletic career. And I asked him about that. I mean, I think he was actually, on a professional team and destined, for many years of glory with that, but it ended with that. And we talked about things like, mundane things like the healthcare systems and stuff like that. But because he was sitting across from me for a long time before he got up, I was proceeding in the conversation as if, I didn't know that he had had an physical impairment. And what that did is it opened up this conversation because we were going to part ways. And there was no reason why I couldn't, forge ahead and just ask him all about it because there was, I wasn't, it's not like we were meeting in a class or on a job where I could slowly in the future get into the real story. I could forge ahead and we could have a very honest conversation. And then we ended up, getting off the train. We were sightseeing around Paris together. So it's like we had forced intimacy emotional, let's say, or intellectual or something, that was very fast because we had a ticking clock.
Sure.
And I think a lot of movies use that ticking clock thing.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that Rick and I used in the story is that we knew that they had to part.
So I want to go back for a moment to just talk about the process of working with Mr. Linkletter here.
Sure.
So how did it literally work? Did you have to be in a room together where he'd suggest a line of dialogue for Jesse and then you'd counter dialogue with Celine? Did you only write the Celine dialogue and vice versa?
So for about a week, we sat in my living room just talking and writing notes. And we ended the week deciding on general topics that we thought would be interesting. We wrote them on index cards and we got down on my floor with the index cards and we were arranging them on the floor into an order that we thought would be realistic for a conversation between two young people. And so we ended up taping them on a big piece of poster board. At that point, we moved over to his apartment where he had a computer. I did not yet have a computer. This was April, May of 1993. He pinned the poster board above his computer and he would sit down and he would write a line, and then I would sit down and write a line. And we both went back and forth like that. Every night for a number of days, we worked all night, usually all night. We worked long hours.
But you didn't exclusively write for Celine and he didn't exclusively write for Jesse. It sounds like it was collaborative.
Yeah, we definitely, contributed ideas to each character. But I would say he primarily worked on Jesse. I primarily worked on Celine. Like while he was writing, I would be pacing around the living room. And while he was writing, so you see what I'm saying? And in the middle of the night, we'd take a break and we'd walk down to the convenience store and talk. So we worked very, very quickly and very calmly. And I would say very kind of happily and joyfully because there were really no expectations at all. And in fact, he told me, he said right away when we got to his apartment, I knew nothing about how the business side of the film industry worked.
Okay.
Thank God, because it's kind of, rough.
Well,
And
that could suck your soul out right there. Maybe that was a blessing.
100%. And he said to me right away, he said, hey, let's just consider this an ambitious failure. I had a couple of, dreams and fantasies about, oh, well, so and so would be good in this, and so and this would be nice. But we did not yet know, like, whether it would be funded or where it would be shot. I mean, we thought it in America. We tossed around various names and things like that for people that could act in it. But
Right. And I don't think the casting happened for quite a long time afterward, right? I read that it took quite a while. He really deliberated on who to pick for the roles.
yeah, there was a guy named David Thewlis, who was interested in it. But then when Ethan Hawke became interested in it, Rick was excited because Ethan had just had a big success with Reality Bites.
Right.
But the thing with that was Rick was also getting interest from European production companies because in Europe, sometimes countries have deals where their government will help fund a film because if you shoot in their country, it's kind of a promotion of sorts of their country.
Sure.
So he was getting some interest from various countries, and we thought, well, gosh, that might mean that we have to move everything out of, we had been thinking America, Amtrak,
I was going to ask you, when did Vienna kind of get solidified here?
Well, I believe that was 1994. I mean, it was moving pretty fast at that point.
Hmm.
But when it got solidified in 94, we realized that we could transfer the scenes easily. But, it was location really didn't matter.
Yeah, there were only a few landmarks that are, exclusive to Vienna. I mean, it could have been any church cemetery in Europe, let's say.
Absolutely.
Obviously, you tweak, you roll with the changes as the story and the production, pre-production evolves. But it sounds like you had an adaptable narrative, right? You could have easily transferred it to any major city that you wanted to. Is that fair to say?
Oh, yes, and then when we went to Vienna and we saw basically it was a matter I had not been at that point, and it was a matter of, looking in the city
Hmm.
and finding spots that were beautiful, that were cinematic, that were romantic, and God, that city is gorgeous.
Oh, it's a bucket list. I've got to go there someday, and not just because I've seen the movie, but yeah, you hear other people who've traveled to Austria, Vienna. It's gorgeous. Yes.
Quietly romantic, like Paris, of course, is incredible, but Vienna is quietly romantic. So then what Rick really wanted, he said, "Well, we have to have one of the characters needs to be European, and since we've got Ethan, we will need to find a European actress." And I had seen casting footage from a lot of American actresses, some of which were really great.
Hmm.
Like there was an audition from Lily Taylor, who was much later, and she was in that show 6 Feet Under, and
All right.
her audition was so great, but we needed a European, and Rick liked Julie Delpy's, audition, and she had recently been in something that had done sort of well, so and I think, what I was told was he thought she looked like me.
That's a plus.
So,
There you go.
that
Hmm.
was it was we were having to move fairly quickly, I think, at that point, and thank God, there were wonderful actors already in Vienna
Hmm.
who were long established or who were wonderful and quirky character actors who would be perfect for some of these little moments, like coming across street performers,
Sure.
things like that, that would fit right in.
Right. Yeah. No, I'm sure that, as we said, the screenplay evolves to fit the setting too. So that makes sense. It almost feels like, and I'm sure this wasn't the case. Everything's very carefully planned out, but it almost feels like Linklater, in setting up shop in Vienna, getting the camera and all the crew ready. Oh, there's a street performer over there. Let's include a scene with that person. I doubt that happened. Right. I'm sure a lot of this was pre-planned.
Well, yes, except I do have to say, Rick, and I think a lot of good directors will be flexible enough to go with the flow and to move with the vibe.
That's smart. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, if something really interesting or beautiful is happening,
Hmm.
there's nothing to hold them back from saying, "Hey, roll them,"
Right.
like, "Let's do this." So, there were some moments, and by the way, I was faxing scenes. I at this point had enough time to my subconscious, I think, was organically working on things, so I was faxing things to him and saying, "Hey, what about the spiders? Did you know female spiders eat the male spider after they have sex with them?"
That's great dialogue. Absolutely. So it's fair to say then you were not on location with him.
I wasn't until toward the end of the location. Oftentimes, writers are not on location
Hmm.
until writers, that they've done their job. And at the end of it, I was on location and watching the footage or watching the filming and seeing some of the editing and things like that. But for the most part, while it was being filmed, I was faxing, doing a lot of fax.
And that tells you exactly what era we're talking about here, right? So,
That's right.
yeah.
That's right. Long gone.
What are you most proud of as a co-creator of this work?
The thing I think, Eric, that really resonates with me is that people remember the film and that it still touches them. And I have to tell you that it was written, at least coming from me, with no expectation because, like I told you, I'd never written a film before.
Hmm.
And I was really writing out of my heart. I was writing from my truth, which was I believe we live for the moment. It's really folly to want to achieve happiness permanently or to believe that anything really lasts. I think at heart I'm a real existentialist who thinks that we're bobbing along in the universe and that we need to grab hold of moments that mean something and we need to preserve those in our memory as a way to find meaning in life
Mhm.
because, as a young person, I think I realized that there are moments of extreme fulfillment and moments of terrible unhappiness, and then all sorts of gray in between. And so when I was working with Linklater, I think I proposed to him almost immediately that communication between two people, you can never really know if you're understood. You can only try, it's only an effort. And when you have that feeling that you're understood, it's such a beautiful thing that sometimes you never forget that moment. Say you're on a train and you have a wonderful conversation with somebody, but then you have to part ways. Well, hopefully you preserve that in your memory and you're like, gosh, I had that great conversation on the way to London, or that beautiful moment with that guy on the way to Paris. And
Uh-huh.
we have these incredible moments and I hope that we can preserve those. I think what really means a lot to me is that people today, and especially young people, feel like the movie is teaching them something about that it's conveying something about that. That really heartens me that lasted all these years. Like this anniversary, it's 30 years later.
Yes.
I can't believe it because I had no expectations, and I cannot believe that 30 years later it's lasted.
It's amazing. Yeah.
I thought that like any other movie, it would be talked about for a month or 2 or 3 and then would be gone,
Yeah.
you know?
Right. Like when they're creating the film Titanic by James Cameron, they probably have a pretty good idea that, yeah, people are going to be talking about this movie for decades, for better or worse, whatever you think about that movie. I mean, it was just so big, right?
Right.
But something like Before Sunrise just comes out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And somehow it captures the zeitgeist, but you had to be there and pay attention. And if you came to the party late, it's still okay. It's of its time, but it's also not, right? To me, it really is pretty timeless. And it's just that little engine that could. There's another train metaphor for you. It powers past so many other bigger movies, quote unquote, with the simplicity of its great ideas, the benefits of living life spontaneously, of seizing the moment, of seeking permanence in a world of impermanence. So many great ideas and themes in this movie that you've already touched on, and I completely agree with you. So
Yeah.
it must be a very proud moment for you to look back on this 30 years later.
Yes, the carpe diem.
Yes.
I love that, and I love the fact that you said it's not only of its time, like, for example, pre-internet and all the romance of that,
Mm-hmm.
all the old-fashionedness of that, but also I love the fact that it has a timelessness to it because that means a lot to me because the works of art that have really touched me, they are from their time, like, say, the Diaries of Annie Eastman, the ones that I love the diaries from the 20s, the 30s, and they mean so much to me. But the timelessness of her emotions and the struggle, the human struggle. I taught my students Plato's allegory of the cave.
The Cave, yeah.
Yes, which was written roughly, 400 years BC. And yet the students couldn't believe this is well over 2,000 years old. And yet they understand the message written by this man who was putting this down well before computers, cars, before America existed, before, the Renaissance, before let's keep going. It was written before the time of Christ. It was written, and they're like, my God, it's like he's talking to me about my era. And so the fact that a work of art can last just these 30 years, that just, is a thrilling thing for me. And I'm very proud of that.
You should be. You absolutely should be. So, yeah, what are you currently working on, Kim, that listeners should know about, and where can we follow you online?
Oh, thank you for asking. All I can tell you is that I've been asked by some European filmmakers to put together a story about one of the great sex symbols of the 20th century. And I'm trying to put together a story for them right now. I hope that that comes out. It will be, if it does, it will come out in Europe.
Wow.
Like you said, I am teaching it's an online writing class. People can watch videos whenever they want on Patreon. It's my little writing sanctuary called The Magic Hour, and it's on Patreon. And they can also find me on Instagram. It's just Kim Krizan, and I believe that is where you found me, Eric. So I'm on Instagram having a lot of fun figuring out what people are into these days and watching way too many cat videos, to be honest.
I really enjoyed this conversation, Kim. I appreciate your time and learning more about you and the whole process involved in creating the characters and the story of Before Sunrise. Wishing you a happy new year and extending our deepest appreciation for appearing on Cineversary.
Well, thank you, Eric, so much. Happy Cineversary to you. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I really appreciate your questions. So thank you so much.
Wonderful memories and insights shared by Kim Krizan there. My deepest thanks again for the opportunity to discuss your collaboration with Richard Linklater and how the story of Before Sunrise came to be written. Time again for standing ovations. This is where I give a shout out to a film, a book, a TV program, a website, a podcast, or other work that I think would be of great interest to classic film lovers just like you and me. For January, I have several Cineversary-related shout-outs. So first, there are a handful of prominent re-releases headed back to the big screen, celebrating milestone anniversaries this month and next. Case in point number 1, David Fincher's Seven returns to theaters today and tomorrow, January 15th and 16th, so your window of time is pretty limited, and that's an IMAX exclusive, so check your local listings to see if it's playing in your area. Then, The Goonies gets the 40th birthday treatment in a limited theatrical run from Fathom Events, and that's going to be January 19th and 20th. So again, short notice, but hop on it. Harry Potter fans can see some of their favorite films in the series back in the cinema between February 13th and March 2nd. Compliments of Fathom, including Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, which observes a 20th anniversary this year, as well as Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, and Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Again, dates and locations will vary, so check your local listings carefully. Now, that's about as far out as the Classic Film 2025 re-release calendar reveals so far, but here's my shout-out to many of the other masterworks marking major birthdays this year that you may want to seek out on your own, several of which, by the way, we will be honoring in episodes of this very podcast in the months ahead, hint, hint. Marking a 100th anniversary in 2025, we've got The Phantom of the Opera and Battleship Potemkin. 90th anniversary wishes go out to The Bride of Frankenstein, Top Hat, The 39 Steps, and Mutiny on the Bounty, all released in 1935. 10 years later, it was Brief Encounter, Mildred Pierce, Spellbound, and Children of Paradise. They are all celebrating 80th anniversaries this year. In 1950, Sunset Boulevard, All About Eve, Rashomon, and Cinderella hit theaters, which means they are 75 years old this year. Rebel Without a Cause, The Night of the Hunter, Lady and the Tramp, and East of Eden turned 70 in 2025, all released in 1955. 60th anniversary honors this year will go out to The Sound of Music and Dr. Zhivago, both released in 1965. And when it comes to golden birthdays, it's a heck of a year. Jaws, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and the Rocky Horror Picture Show all debuted back in 1975. 40th birthday wishes apply to Back to the Future, The Breakfast Club, The Goonies, and Witness, each of them 1985 features. Meanwhile, Toy Story, Braveheart, Seven, and Clueless are 30 years old this year. And 25th anniversary wishes apply to Gladiator, Memento, American Psycho, and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. As I said, some of these will be getting their own standalone episodes in 2025 on Cineversary, while others were featured in past episodes that you might want to look up. So, what's on tap for February? We are going to spotlight one of the greatest works of world cinema and one of Italy's finest exports, whose title translates as The Good Life, and it's more than just a good movie. It's possibly Federico Fellini's crowning masterpiece. Join us next month as we commemorate the 65th anniversary of La Dolce Vita, originally released in February 1960. Until that time, this is your humble host, Eric Martin, reminding you to butter up that popcorn, live a big screen surround sound life, and yes, indeed, cherish those classic movies. They are not getting older, they're getting sunrisier. As always, thanks for giving us a listen.